3:27 a.m., my phone lit the room. Caller ID, Laurel Pines, main line. I answered. "Ellie," my dad said, steady and clear, "I didn't sign anything. Find the bird with no eyes." The line died. I was dressed and out the door in 60 seconds. At the front desk, the manager smiled. "Visiting hours start at 9. A nurse flicked her 2 fingers, "Come on," and I slipped down the hall. On my father's chart, a bright red DNR. The signature looked rushed. The T wasn't cross-long the way my dad always does. I took a photo. The manager said no photos. I kept the photo. I drove to Dad's bungalow, opened the yellow tool drawer marked birds, and held a ceramic bluebird with no eyes. Something rattled inside. Under the felt bottom, a thumb drive, and a notarized directive naming me, Eleanor Hart, as healthcare proxy. On the drive, Dad looked into the camera. "If I forget again, Ellie is my voice. She reads the fine print." By 8 a.m., I was in a courtroom. I showed the judge the directive, the video, and the DNR with the wrong T-cross. He clicked his pen, looked at me, and said, "Miss Hart, we're going to fix this today." Before sunrise, I was just a school secretary. By noon, I was my father's guardian. This is how a midnight call, a ceramic bird, and one long T stopped a man from being written quiet, and how I learned to be the voice my dad needed. Stay with me. I'll show you exactly how it happened. My father is Thomas Hart, a Vietnam vet who never told me many stories about the war, but taught me how to change a tire, pay cash when it keeps you honest, and cross your T's long enough that no one can pretend they didn't see them. He has a laugh that creaks like a screen door and hands that can fix anything except time. 2 years ago, time started to slip for him. First it was the keys in the freezer, then the coffee pot left on. The same question asked 3 times in 10 minutes. The bills stacked on the stove under a plate because he meant to deal with them and then forgot he meant to deal with them. We fought it the way you fight a tide you don't want to admit is stronger than you are. Pill organizers, Post-it notes on the bathroom mirror, big block letters on the fridge that said, "Take morning meds, text Ellie, feed dog." He fed the dog twice some days. The dog didn't mind. When winter came in mean and the ice laid a slick on the steps, my younger half-brother Caleb started using words like practical. He showed up with a folder and a practiced voice and said, "Ellie, this isn't about love. It's about what's appropriate." He had a perfect part in his hair and a watch that checked his heart rate and a habit of straightening things that didn't belong to him, picture frames, piles of mail, my sentences. He'd been my dad's son every other weekend and on alternating holidays, the kind of arrangement that leaves you loving each other from 2 different living rooms. He meant well, I told myself. He always did. But he liked to be in charge in the way a man likes to be taller than his shadow. Laurel Pines Assisted Living sits back from the road behind a row of elms that drop their leaves like confetti in October. The brochure has pictures of porch rockers and hummingbird feeders, women wearing cardigans, and men with combed hair and crossword puzzles. "Home with help," it says in friendly font. The first time we toured, Dad squeezed my hand and said, "Looks like a pretty place to get old, doesn't it, Peanut?" He called me that when I was small, and my head fit perfectly under his chin. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do, and because the marketing director had a way of saying memory care, like it was a spa treatment. Caleb did most of the talking. He used words like transition and decision maker and durable power of attorney. He said the last way some men say touchdown. He sat across from the facility manager, a woman with frost blonde hair and a soft pink scarf whose name tag read Marla Jenkins, and they compared calendars the way people do when they're sure the logistics prove the love. When you love someone, you pick your battles. I let Caleb draw up the paperwork and nodded when he explained it to me in a voice that sounded like a closing door. He said, "I'll handle the hard stuff. You just visit." I swallowed that just like a stone and told myself families come in different shapes, and if his shape was spreadsheets and mine was banana bread and sitting quietly in uncomfortable chairs, maybe that was okay. I went with Dad on Sundays, brought him the little ceramic bluebird he carved one summer in his garage and painted the exact color of July sky. Somewhere along the years, the tiny glass beads that were its eyes had fallen out. We joked the bird saw with its heart. Dad kept it on his nightstand in Laurel Pines like a small witness that said he was still Thomas Hart and someone still knew it. Routine is how you make peace with what hurts. I'd work my days at the school with the bell schedule like a metronome and then swing by the assisted living, parking in the slot under a tree that sapped my windshield every spring. I knew which CNAs like ginger snaps and which ones might give Dad an extra 5 minutes to tell a story he couldn't finish. I brought him new socks. I brought him the local paper. I learned which days Marla was on and how she could make HIPAA sound like a wall and concern sound like a kind of ownership. She'd say, "We just want to keep him calm." And I thought of a pasture and a fence built way too high.
There's a kind of forgetting that feels like rounding a corner and suddenly not knowing what street you're on. Dad started doing that more. He'd take my hand and call me by my mother's name, and I'd let him, because sometimes mercy is answering to a ghost and not correcting it. Other times he was so himself, it hurt. He'd run a hand through his thinning hair and ask if I'd check the air in the tires and tell me not to sign anything I hadn't read twice. I promised. We both pretended a promise was a rope that could pull him back across some wide river. 15 months of that, and then the night that split my life into before and after. My phone lit the bedroom at 3:27 in the morning with a glow that felt like bad news, even with my eyes still stuck to sleep. Laurel Pines, main line, the screen said. Facilities don't call it that hour unless they're about to put a doorbell on your heart. I answered and whispered, "Hello?" Because even what you say is quieter in the middle of the night. Breathing on the other end, dry. A scrape of throat like a match, then a voice that tangled something deep in me. "Ellie," my father said. The syllables were careful, not floaty or lost. "Listen, I didn't sign anything. Find the bird with no eyes." In the background, a man's voice, impatient and not meant for the phone. "Mr. Hart, you shouldn't be—" The line went dead like a sentence dropped into a well. I have had my heart jump before. Sirens behind me when I didn't realize I was going 10 over. A needle on a pregnancy test before it decided one way or the other. But I have never felt my heart climb out of my chest and walk to the door like it was ready to leave. I was in jeans and sneakers in less than a minute. My keys were in my hand before my brain had its shoes on. I drove the empty streets, the world so quiet that the crosswalk lights looked like actors waiting for the lead to show up. I ran 2 red lights, and Jesus can forgive me because I couldn't forgive myself if I didn't get there. Laurel Pines at 3:42 a.m. looks like a painting. Lights just bright enough to cast a hum, machines awake, voices careful in the way people are when they know houses are sleeping. The lobby smelled like lemon and the kind of flowers you buy when you don't know someone well enough to bring food. Marla sat at the desk, hair perfect, pink scarf, a smile that reached her teeth but not her eyes. She said, "Visiting hours start at 9, and the way she said hours felt like offense again. "My dad just called me," I said, "from your line at 3:27. I'm going back." She said HIPAA. It sounded like a spell. "He needs rest. We adjusted his meds. He's very comfortable." From the hall, Dina Foley, a nurse I knew who wore compression socks with little daisies because she said the patients noticed, peeked around the corner and lifted 2 fingers in a quick "come on." I slid past the desk and the lemon and the rules, because there are rules and then there are commandments, and mine is that if my father calls me in the night, I go. His room was dim and smelled like the orange lotion the CNAs use and the faint sterile underneath. His eyes were closed, but he opened them when he felt my hand, the way people do when they know their person is near. "Ellie?" he asked, a question and a name. "I'm here," I said, even though I wasn't sure where here was anymore. "Dad, what did you mean, the bird with no eyes?" His fingers twitched like a man trying to hold on to a slippery thought. "Don't let them write me quiet," he said. "Your name on the yellow one, bottom drawer." There are sentences that make sense even when they don't. They have weight. They land. The hair lifted on my arms. I glanced down at the chart clipped to the foot of his bed, because that's where the truth hides when it doesn't want to be talked about. There was a big red sticker that shouted, even in the dim, "DNR, comfort care only." Underneath, 2 words that change real life fast if you're not watching: sedation, PRN for agitation. And under that, a signature that was supposed to be my father's. He always crossed his T's long, like a flag waving. The T on that page looked like someone who didn't know him signed for him in a hurry. I took a quick picture with my phone because sometimes the first thing you save is the proof. Marla walked in before I had the camera down. She said, "No photos." "Then don't commit a story you wouldn't want told," I said, but only in my head, because even angry, I've lived long enough in this county to know you collect your facts before you throw your words like rocks. On my way out, Dina brushed my arm. "He had a good day yesterday," she whispered. "He knew me. He asked for the bluebird." She glanced toward the desk. "Be careful." By 4:12 a.m., I was sitting in my car with my forehead on the steering wheel, my breath fogging up the windshield, and the feeling in my chest like a fist that didn't belong to me. I drove to my dad's bungalow on Maple Street, where the porch light still comes on if you jiggle the switch 3 times. The living room smelled like cedar and old motor oil and the dust that gathers around a life you've paused. I flicked on the lamp next to the recliner where he watched ball games and fell asleep with the dog in his lap. The house was a story I knew by heart. That helped. In the kitchen, the tool chest waited under the window where the morning light comes in bold. The yellow one. Bottom drawer. He taught me tool language, Phillips and flathead, socket and ratchet, Allen wrench named for a man who thought hexes should make sense. The bottom drawer had a piece of masking tape on it with his square handwriting, "Birds." It made me laugh in a way that made my throat burn. I pulled it open. There, cushioned in a nest of old shop rags that smelled faintly of his aftershave, was the ceramic bluebird, no glass eyes, that exact July sky. When I turned it over in my hands, something inside it rattled. Dad taught me how to find a seam when a thing wants to keep its secrets. The felt on the bottom had been lifted and glued down again. I slid a flathead screwdriver under the edge and gently pried. The felt peeled back like a bandage you finally decided to remove. Inside the little hollow were 2 things, a thumb drive the size of a fingernail and a folded paper with a notary stamp that looked like Sunday school gravity. The paper was my father's advance directive from 18 months earlier, before Laurel Pines, notarized by Mrs. Dotson from church, the woman who brings ambrosia salad to every potluck and a pen to every prayer chain. It said in plain words that didn't need a law degree, I, Thomas Hart, name my daughter, Eleanor Hart, as my healthcare proxy. I do not consent to DNR unless my proxy concurs. His signature sat at the bottom like something living. I plugged the thumb drive into my old laptop that sounds like a plane when it's trying hard. A video popped open dated 6 months after the directive. My father sat at the kitchen table with his glasses low on his nose and the bluebird between his hands. "If I start forgetting again," he said, looking straight into the camera, "Ellie's my voice, not Caleb. I love that boy, but he rushes things. Ellie reads the fine print." He smiled then, that lopsided smile that used to talk me down from cliffs when I was 16 and sure heartbreak was death. He looked older than the last time he taught me something, and exactly the same. There is practical, and then there is urgent. Cedar Ridge County Courthouse opens at 8, and my town still believes the doors should be unlocked by a person with a key. I called legal aid as the dark pushed back and the birds decided morning had won. A woman answered with the sleep still in her voice and the steel already in her words. Legal aid, this is Avery. I told her in a rush that I was not going to cry because crying slows you down, and I didn't have time. I told her about the call at 3:27, the red sticker, the skewed T, the bird with no eyes, the directive, the video, my father's laugh. I told her about Caleb's folder and the way he said practical, like a prayer to a God I don't serve. She was quiet in the way people are when they are measuring, not doubting. She said, "Come in. Bring the document, the drive, and your ID. We'll file for an emergency guardianship and a temporary restraining order on medical decisions. If what you're telling me is what it sounds like, a judge will want to hear it today." At 7:59, I stood at the courthouse doors with a farmer in a feed store cap, a woman in scrubs, and a man in a thrift store suit carrying 2 coffees like he was saving somebody's life. The metal detector beeped because my life does that when things are hard. The clerk behind the glass knew my face because in a small county, you cannot sneeze without someone you taught you second-grade manners seeing you at Food Lion. "You okay, Ellie?" she asked. I said, "I need to be." Avery Dunn wore a navy blazer, flats made for quick walking, and a look that said she had called too many mothers back after midnight. She had the kind of handshake that listens and the kind of eyes that don't waste time. We sat in a small room that felt like an office had grown inside a hallway and spread the documents out like cards. She watched the video with her lips pressed together. When my father said, "Ellie reads the fine print," she glanced at me. She said, "He read the fine print on you, too." Judge Morales has a face like every good scoutmaster you've ever known and a pen that clicks when he's thinking. His courtroom smells like old wood and floor wax and the collective sigh of people who want to be believed. He looked at my father's directive and Mrs. Dotson's stamp. He watched the video twice. He tilted the photo of the NDR with the red sticker and squinted at the T the way my dad would have. "Where is Mr. Caleb Hart?" he asked in a voice that was tired of being handed papers with more confidence than conscience.
Caleb walked in looking like a man surprised his meeting got moved. He hugged me sideways and said, "This is getting blown out of proportion," which is what people say when the proportion finally matches the truth. He explained that he had durable power of attorney because he handled the hard stuff. He said the facility had a notary. He said Dad had signed everything in front of witnesses. He said this was what Dad would want. Avery slid the photo of the chart across the bench. "Who signed this DNR?" she asked. "Dad," he said. "He did." Judge Morales tapped the page with his pen. "Mr. Hart crosses his T's long," he said. "This one doesn't. Miss Jenkins is listed as facility manager and notary on the POA transfer you brought last month. That's a conflict. The court finds sufficient reason to question recent documents and potential undue influence. Temporary guardianship is awarded to Ms. Hart. The DNR is hereby suspended pending review. Medical sedation orders for Mr. Hart are paused except for immediate clinical necessity. Sheriff's deputy will accompany you to enforce. We will reconvene in 7 days." The deputy's cruiser looked like a miracle next to my battered Corolla in the Laurel Pines lot. Inside, a transport team was aligning a gurney, and Marla had her clipboard like a shield. "We're prepping Mr. Hart for hospice transfer. It's really what's best for everyone." She said everyone like she meant paperwork, not people. The deputy read the judge's order out loud because sometimes words only work when they're shaped by authority. The transport team stepped back. Marla's smile lost its scaffolding and fell an inch. Avery kept her voice low and even. "Adult Protective Services has been notified," she said. "We will be reviewing all chart changes, med logs, and notarizations." Dad was dozing when we walked in. Dina was at his bedside, and I saw relief cross her face like a small sunrise. She peeled the red sticker off the chart with her thumb and smoothed the remaining paper with the care you give a bruise. "Let's start over," she said. That night, I sat at the foot of my father's bed with the bluebird in my lap like a talisman. He woke long enough to ask if the dog was fed and if I had gas in the car. He told me not to sign anything I hadn't read twice. I said I wouldn't, and both of us pretended you can hold time by making promises to it. When he fell asleep, I watched the lines of his face that I know better than my own.
the way his jaw slackens when he dreams, and the way his hands still look like they could fix a fence if you just hand them a hammer. Morning came because it always does. I took my father to the Sunrise Diner after the doctor approved a day pass, and he ordered waffles and bacon and told the waitress she could go to New York with that smile and still come back for hush puppies. He put hot sauce on his hash browns like always and made a face at the coffee like it was too weak to do anything but apologize. The bluebird sat on the table between the ketchup and the sugar packets like an anchor. He could give it glass eyes again, Dad said, tapping it gently, but maybe it sees better like this. There's a moment after the crisis where the adrenaline stops and all the small fears climb out of their hiding places like children after quiet time. That's when I realized what we had to do next would not fit on one form. APS interviewed staff. A CNA cried and said the word behavioral convenience like it tasted wrong, but she'd had to say it anyway. She talked about a charting code that gets used when someone wanders and a night shift where it's easier to sedate than to sit. Marla lawyered up with the kind of attorney who pronounces words like allegations as if his tongue might bruise. Caleb stopped posting gym selfies and started sending me texts that read, "We need to talk," and "Can we figure this out like adults?" and "You know I've always had Dad's best interests." I stopped answering because sometimes the adult thing is silence until a judge says speak. In between interviews and meetings and the 1,000 small emails with attachments that end up deciding someone's life, I went back to Dad's house. I watered the fern that had one brave green shoot. I sat in his garage and ran my hands over scars on the workbench for 100 projects. I pressed my thumb into the dent where I dropped a hammer the summer he taught me how to build a birdhouse and painted mine a color so loud the birds probably needed sunglasses. I thought about every time he showed up when my car made a sound I couldn't name, and I decided showing up is the most underrated form of love we have. My mother died when I was 27. She left behind recipe cards in her pretty cursive and a line she used to say in the car when we were late and the light turned red. Sometimes a stop is a save in disguise. I heard her voice in the courthouse hallway when I went in for the second hearing, and I had to put my hands in my coat pockets to keep them from shaking.
The bigger courtroom was full of the kind of people who keep counties running and families together by sheer stubbornness. Social workers with clipboards, pastors sitting with parishioners who wanted someone to sit with them, a man in overalls who had probably never sat that still in his life. Judge Morales took the bench with the same steady gravity, and the room grew a spine. "Case of Hart versus Hart," the clerk called, and I watched my name face off against my brother's and tried not to feel like I was pulling our family apart, when truthfully it had been splitting for a long time. Avery laid out the timeline like a map you could trust. Advance directive, notarized 18 months prior, naming me proxy. Video, 6 months later, confirming intent. Recent DNR with signature anomalies, witnessed and notarized by facility manager with a financial interest. Paired with increased sedation orders marked PRN for agitation, with no documented non-pharmacological interventions attempted first. APS findings, deviations from policy, instances of convenient sedation, a transfer pushed through without proxy consent. Dina testified, voice steady, about my father asking for me and being redirected to a nap. Marla said words like policy and standard and miscommunication until they sounded like excuses in a cardigan. Caleb looked like a boy caught with his hand in a jar he swore wasn't cookies. The judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench. "Mr. Hart," he said to my father, who sat 2 rows back with his hands folded like church and his bluebird in his jacket pocket because he said it felt right there. "Do you understand why you're here?" My father stood slowly, dignity buttoned all the way up, even in a body that sometimes forgets breakfast. "We're here because I forgot some things, but not the important thing. Who loves me without trying to hurry me up." Courtrooms are not built for applause, but there are places where silence feels like gratitude. The judge nodded. "Guardianship will remain with Miss Hart. The DNR is lifted unless and until the proxy agrees. The facility will be fined and referred for further state review. Any notarizations by Miss Jenkins related to Mr. Hart are void for conflict.
Mr. Caleb Hart, you will refrain from any medical or placement decisions without Ms. Hart's written consent. We will set a status review in 90 days. Afterwards, in the hallway, Mrs. Dotson hugged me and left glitter on my coat from whatever craft the church ladies had been making. Your mama would be proud. And that sentence landed on my bones like a blessing. We moved Dad to a smaller memory care home run by a nurse named Mia, who wears her wedding ring on a chain because she washes her hands 100 times a day. On the walls are quilts that brighten the hallways and photos from county fairs and a bulletin board where the activities director posts Polaroids of residents with tomatoes they swear they didn't plant. Mia is the kind of woman who writes names on the tags of sweaters in Sharpie and explains every pill as if the person swallowing it had just asked the most important question of the day. The garden out back has a bench under a maple where I sit with Dad on Tuesday afternoons and listen to birds he can't always name, but enjoys anyway. Memory is a trickster, but dignity doesn't have to be. With the sedation ratcheted back and care turned toward curiosity instead of control, my father began to have more moments that felt like him. He played dominoes with a man who used to be a math teacher. He sang a verse of Take Me Home Country Roads with a woman who wore pearls with her sweats because she remembered how wearing them made her feel. He held the bluebird like a worry stone and rubbed his thumb over the place where the eye should have been until the ceramic shone. He asked me to bring him the newspaper and circle the obituaries because he said the dead deserved a circle. He told Mia she ran a tight ship and then whispered, "But a kind one," like that was a secret he couldn't keep. Caleb knocked on my door a week later, and we stood on my stoop like kids who had been sent outside to figure it out. He looked thinner, or maybe just smaller. He held his hands out and then put them back in his pockets. I didn't mean to hurt him. He sounded sincere, and that made it complicated. I thought if the doctors handled it, it would be cleaner. I don't do well with mess. I could have said that life is mess. I could have said control isn't care. I could have said you can't spreadsheet grief. Instead, I said, "Do you want to come with me when I visit him tomorrow?" He nodded. We didn't hug because sometimes the most merciful thing is leaving a space that might fill later. He came with me the next day, and Dad looked at him and called him by his childhood nickname, and something in Caleb's face cracked open. He cried in a way that embarrassed him, and I put my hand on his back and didn't say anything because words can't do what presence does in moments like that. He apologized to my father for rushing, and my father said, "You were trying to fix something you didn't build," which is both absolution and a sentence I want to cross-stitch on every wall. There are degrees of consequences. APS continued their investigation. The state looked at Laurel Pines. Marla resigned before the official findings, which told me more than her lawyer's press release did. The DA's office called me for a statement, and I told the truth without glory. I said families get scared, and facilities get busy, and people make choices that are easier for them and harder on the person in the bed. I said the law exists because love needs ladders to climb out of holes. I said paperwork is love when you do it before the crisis. I said if you take anything away from my story, let it be that. Life settled into a new rhythm that did not look anything like normal, but was ours. On Tuesday nights, I drove to the memory care home with a container of meatloaf and a plastic fork because Dad likes to eat his favorite things out of the kind of vessel you don't have to fuss over. We sat under the maple and watched the light move and not move. He told me stories that were half true and all his. He asked if I checked the oil, and I said yes, even when I hadn't, because I'd learned there are lies that are kindnesses. He rubbed the bluebird's empty eye and said, "We see with our hearts here." And I nodded, because sometimes that felt like the only kind of seeing that mattered. On Sundays, we went to church. He sat in the third pew on the left like he always did and sang the parts of hymns he remembered in a voice that made the people around us sing a little louder. Mrs. Dotson squeezed my hand during the prayer of the people and whispered, "Did you bring the bird?" I held it up like a relic, and she smiled. After the service in the fellowship hall that smells like coffee and crayons and waxed floors, a woman told me her sister had been at Laurel Pines and asked for my lawyer's name. I wrote down Avery Dunn on a napkin. Then I wrote, "Keep copies. Tell your people, make sure the one who knows where the paperwork lives has a key." I signed my name and drew a tiny bluebird, because sometimes you have to make a symbol out of what saved you so people will remember. At work, I went back to my desk where the 7th graders come to ask for Band-Aids and excuses, and I put the bluebird on the shelf beside the pencil sharpener. When a teacher asked why there was a bird with no eyes at the front desk, I said, "It sees what matters." And they looked at me like I was either very wise or very tired. Both can be true. I answered phones and did attendance and reminded myself that ordinary is the net that catches you when you've been falling for a long time. Once in a while, when a storm rolls across the county fairgrounds and the thunder bumps the windows, I'll wake at 3:27 and lie there listening to the house. The night has its own noises. Refrigerators settling, AC units thinking, trees having conversations. I'll think about the sound of my father's voice on that night. I'll hear him say, "Find the bird with no eyes," and I'll feel part of me stand up and walk again into the dark because that sentence made me brave in a way I didn't know I still could be. I keep the bluebird on my desk at home too, because there are days when I need to press my thumb into that empty space and remind myself that love doesn't require perfect vision. It requires attention, which is maybe the most sacred form of time we have left to give. People ask me now, women my age mostly, the ones with graying roots and calendars full of other people's needs, "How did you know?" I told them I didn't. I tell them I listened. I tell them my father's midnight sentence was either a miracle or the last perfect alignment of his neurons. But either way, it was a truth. I tell them to read everything before they sign it, to update their parents' documents before they need them, to scan copies and put them in 2 different places, one boring like a filing cabinet, one silly like inside a ceramic bird. I tell them to walk into night lobbies with their shoulders back and their phones charged. I tell them there's a difference between being in control and being trustworthy, that one is about power and the other is about love. And their people can feel the difference, even when they can't say your name.
Caleb and I are learning each other again. He brings Dad pints of strawberry ice cream and updates me on the ball scores. He sits with him for an hour on Thursday so I can go to my own doctor's appointment without guilt chewing on me. Sometimes he starts to say something that sounds like the old closing door voice and catches himself. He texts me pictures of Dad making silly faces for his kids, and I text back blue hearts and a bird emoji because we're not very good at heavy, but we are practicing light. When the county called about a support group for caregivers, I went because I've learned the stubborn solo of suffering is not the same as strength. We sit in a circle in the library's meeting room under a poster about reading to your toddler and take turns telling the truth. One woman cared for her mother for 9 years and still flinches when the phone rings after midnight. A man whose wife used to be a professor now puts stickers on her drawers to help her find sweaters. We trade tips about which pharmacies deliver on time and who to ask for at the neurologist's office and which songs wake up memory like a friendly ghost. We laugh in the places you're supposed to cry and cry in the places where no one expects it. We pass tissues and peppermint candies and the kind of understanding you can't buy anywhere. At the end of the meetings, we write down one practical thing and one beautiful thing. Practical might be put a list of emergency numbers on the inside of the pantry door. Beautiful might be sit outside for 6 minutes at sunset. Mine always includes paperwork because that's the hill I plan to stand on and wave a flag until someone notices. Paperwork is love. It is the decision you make in the clear morning for the version of yourself who might be calling out from 3:27 a.m.
It is a letter to your family that says, I trust you. It is a blueprint, a map, a ceramic bird with a secret inside. Dad comes to my house on Saturday afternoons when the weather is kind. He sits on the porch and counts the cars that go by and tells me the stories his mind has decided are the ones worth keeping. Sometimes he thinks I'm 8 and asks if I've done my math homework. Sometimes he is all here and tells me to look at the gum trees because they are trying so hard to get my attention with their color. He falls asleep and I cover him with the blue quilt my mother made. His breathing is a sound that makes me think of oceans, even though he never liked boats. The dog snuffles at his hand, hopeful for crumbs that aren't coming. The sun moves, time moves, love sits. On the hard days, when the confusion snarls and the fear pulls at his patience, when he yells at a nurse and then cries because he yelled, I remind myself the person and the disease are not the same. I think of the sentence he managed to gather from the scattered pieces inside his head and hand to me like a key. I think how trust can survive in a body that forgets the day of the week. I think how a man can lose nouns and still find courage. Sometimes, late at night, I take the bluebird off my desk and run my fingertips over the smooth curve of its back. I think about those glass eyes we never replaced and how we decided it's all just fine without them. I think about how often I have failed to see the thing right in front of me because I was busy or hurt or certain I already knew. I press my thumb where the eye would be and say out loud to the quiet house, help me see with my heart. And then I do the next thing I know to do. Set the coffee, check the calendar, put the documents back in the folder, text Caleb the visiting schedule, write a note to Mia about Dad's favorite socks, tape a small list to the inside of my purse that reads ID, keys, phone, bird. If you are listening to this and something in you is nodding because the names are different but the ache is the same, here is what I want you to know. You are not crazy for feeling like the world tilted at 3:27 a.m. You are not unkind for asking to read the chart before you nod. You are not alone in the lobby with the lemon smell and the way your voice sounds too loud and too soft at the same time. There are people who will walk into that lobby with you and say, show us the paper. There are judges who will click their pens and notice the cross on a T. There are nurses who will peel off stickers with their thumbs and choose curiosity over convenience. There are brothers who can learn. There are birds with no eyes that will show you exactly what you need to see. My father used to tell me that courage is just deciding to do the thing that comes next, even when you don't know 10 steps ahead. He told me that standing next to a car with a flat in August heat while my hair stuck to the back of my neck and the jack didn't want to cooperate, he don't have to fix the world, just the tire. I can't fix dementia. I can't fix a system that sometimes makes it too easy to quiet the noisy and too hard to hear the quiet. I can't fix all the families who are trying their best with imperfect tools, but I could fix this. I could find the bird, I could hold up the paper, I could walk into the courthouse and out again with a deputy at my side. I could sit in a garden and peel an orange and share the slices with a man who once built me a treehouse and now needs me to remind him where the bathroom is. I could love him in the practical ways and call it holy because it is. The other day, a storm came over Cedar Ridge, quick and dramatic, the way summer storms are when they don't have the decency to warn you. The power blinked at the memory care home and the generator kicked in. A few residents got nervous and one started singing "You Are My Sunshine" like a lifeline. I sat with Dad in the common room while the rain hammered the roof and the lights hummed on their backup. He looked at me and said, "We good?" And I said, "We good."
and his shoulders loosened like a ship tying up to the dock. Mia walked by with a tray of cookies she'd baked in a toaster oven because the kitchen was down, and she said, "Never underestimate a woman with a plan B." We laughed in that tight way you laugh when the world is reminding you of how fragile it is and how often plan B is where the miracles happen. When the storm passed, the air smelled like rinsed off. I took Dad outside to the garden, and the tomatoes wore raindrops like jewels. He reached out and touched one and said, "Look at that, still here." He wasn't talking about the tomato. I nodded and put the bluebird on the bench between us, and we sat there until the sun came through the clouds and the maples shook off the water, and the birds, unseen but not unfelt, started up again like a hymn that knows all the verses. I don't know how long I have with him, the kind of time you can count or the kind you feel in your chest. But I know this: if my phone rings at 3:27 a.m. again, I will answer, because that call taught me the sound of my own courage. And if it never rings at that hour again, I will still sip my coffee the night before and keep the folder where I can find it and show up at the places love requires showing up. I will keep the bluebird near, not because I believe in magic, but because I believe in reminders. I will remember that the difference between control and trust is which way you point your hands, down to press someone into compliance or out to offer them a steadying grip. When Dad falls asleep in his chair at my house on Saturday afternoons and the dog snores his approval, I sit on the porch and write down what I want my people to know if there comes a day when I can't tell them. It starts like this: don't let anyone write me quiet until the one who knows how I laugh says it's time. Trust the version of me who made choices on the bright mornings. Keep the bluebird. It sees just fine. And remember, sometimes a stop is a save in disguise.